Very good. So I'll chat to Stephen a bit. We're going to have another video. I'll chat to Stephen a bit more. We'll then do all the winners, which will be very exciting. And then we're going to have bring the audience in so you can chat to Stephen as well. That's basically the format. The first question I've got, Stephen, is a tough one. Are you going to take your coat off?
Well, I thought I looked rather cool in my coat.
Well, coolish, but we're slightly worried you might just bugger off to Belgium or something.
Yeah. I might take it off then. Go on.
There you go.
I'll leave it in a puddle underneath me. There it is.
Nice and warm in the apples.
Yeah, it's fine.
The second thing I'd like to say, and I think on behalf of us all in the Apple Store, is congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, bless you. Thank you. There's my ring. It's very exciting. I'm probably the only person who's ever got married, so I can tell you it's really exciting. It's great. It's thrilling. I'm very happy.
I mean, it was quite an interesting moment. But here we are going to talk about technology, and the marriage, you were outed, so to speak, because of technology.
Well, not strictly true. Well, the marriage I outed myself using technology, but in fact the engagement had been of long standing, and I went to a registry office, and they explained that the announcement had to go up, and so somewhere on a small piece of paper in a municipal building in Norwich was my name and the name of my now husband, and
still feels good.
Yeah, it does. It's great. And that was picked up. Somebody saw that, and they told the press about that. So that was very old school. Right. But when it came marvellously, the registrar, who was extremely on our side with our desire not to have photographers and journalists at the actual ceremony, she brilliantly put a false date in the computer, so that anybody who hacked it or sneakily looked at it who shouldn't would think we were going to be married on the 7th of March. And she didn't tell anybody else what the real date was, so we managed to get married without a single journalist present. But then, yes, I tweeted a picture of ourselves saying, that we'd gone in as separate people and come out as one. And that sort of put it under our control. It meant that the press would no longer be following us, because you can't really pretend that the press aren't interested in something, although it seems very vain to try and control the press. If you don't, they will control you. So it's pretty necessary. And that actually, Twitter, for the last 7 or 8 years that I've been on it, it is wonderful to know that I don't have to do certain interviews and profiles because I have more followers than the circulation of that newspaper. Which is really, I know it's terrible, but it's very, very good to know.
Steering towards a spot of megalomania.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but it's just handy.
Did you have a first dance?
Yes, anyone who's seen me dance wouldn't have called it a dance exactly, but it was a shuffle.
What was the tune?
I had wanted to choose a tune written by Al Jolson. It's the only great tune he wrote, as far as I know. He had some great hits, of course, like California, Here I Come, and Sunny, and Sunny Boy, and so on. But he did write one called "Oh How We Danced on the Night That We Wed," but I couldn't get it on my performing thing, which might or may not have been an Apple thing, which I wouldn't want to suggest that I'm in any way in hock to Apple. It could easily be an Android device, but unfortunately I'm not a total idiot. So, no, shush. So, yeah, it was, I can't actually, it was Cole Porter. Yeah.
Okay, very good, thank you. That's dealt with. So, to your autobiography, or your memoir, whatever you wish to call it, the third in the series, John Humphreys is a very great man at the BBC. He's brilliant at interviewing people. And when I started at the BBC, I asked him, what's the trick of a good interview? And he says, keep the question short. This
well done.
By the way, yeah. And this is an anecdote more than a question. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, just start with one word, why, and then build it from there if necessary.
Yes. Well, Kipling had the the 5 W's and the H, wasn't it?
Why, what, when, how.
Why, what, when, how, where. Yeah. The journalist questions. Yeah.
So the question on the third memoir is why.
It's a really good question.
And short.
Very short. Contractual obligation is one reason, of course, but also pride. I'd got so far with one book, and then a second. They'd taken me up to a kind of real hinge in my life, and I thought, well, I've got to press on with this, even though it's an unfortunate period in my life in many ways. It's, well, very successful in worldly terms. I was doing lots of films and television and writing and so on, but also in social and personal terms, it was pretty much a disaster. I was alone and lonely, and I had taken to regular supply of cocaine, which,
you
of
talk
course,
about that quite explicitly.
I do. I've never seen the point of writing a memoir which isn't honest, at least as honest as one can make it, without traducing other people. It's not my business too much to mention other people, or to destroy their reputations, or indeed to just mention them in any way if they don't want to be. So it's really, I'm the only one I can attack. I'm the only one I can assault and describe and dissect. Even if I can't do it necessarily accurately, I can always say, I think anybody who's ever tried to write an autobiography, you can always say what happened, but you can very rarely say why. The spectator sees more of the game. I think my friends and family probably know better than I do why I behaved in certain ways, and certainly the effect of it. And all I can do is remember what I did, but it's very hard to remember why.
I mean, the other really difficult thing I would imagine is how to self-edit. What to put in, what to not to put in. Now, you said obviously you don't want to put stuff in there which is going to put other people in an awkward position, but you also have to make a decision what you yourself decide to put in and what you decide to not put in, other than, I suppose, you want to entertain people. What is the criteria for you?
I suppose in the end, the criterion I've always had, and it's one that I'm not necessarily proud of, because it stops me ever being an artist or a person of great authenticity, is what's entertaining. Yeah. I am primarily an entertainer, and I admire artists more than almost any other type of human being. And the ones I know, and I think I mentioned this in the book, the ones I know have a strength of character and of a directness, which is, to me, very awe-inspiring, very impressive, and I can never be that brave. So I think the criterion is that. It is what is, I hope, entertaining. If it becomes dull or it becomes disgusting and turns into something that repels people rather than entrances them, then I'm not really interested in conveying it.
No, you spend a lot of time in the public eye, both as a writer, presenter, comedian, actor, all of the above. It strikes me writing a memoir makes one particularly vulnerable. That people aren't just criticising the work of art; they're criticising the person.
Yeah. The person they don't necessarily know, but they think they know.
You've given them liberty to make a decision. Yeah.
I've projected a personality that people imagine that they know, and they can judge me rightly according to that. And we all do it. Even if you here don't do it to me, you probably do it to Anne Widdecombe or or David Cameron or something like that. People you may not have met, but you have a strong view of. And you might go, bleh, every time they appear on television. Or you might go, wow, God, I love them. And in both cases, it's a prejudgment. It is prejudice in its literal sense. And we all are guilty of prejudice. And it's one of the natures of celebrities that we prejudge celebrities according to our own taste. And it's either revulsion or disgust or something similar, or dislike, or of course it can be indifference, or it can be absolute love, hero worship. And in all cases it's not necessarily right, but it speaks to something we need. I need heroes. So there are people I worship, and they can be as distinct and different as, I don't know, Martina Navratilova and Richard Feynman, say, the scientist who's dead. I can worship them. I know a bit about their lives, and for all I know, I wouldn't really like them that much if I knew them well. I'm too late to know Richard Feynman well, but I've met Martina Navratilova. But I don't really want to know her any better, because there's certain things about her that I just find utterly admirable. And it's partly, I think, that she's so different from me. She doesn't seem to care what people think of her. I have a terrible fault in how much I care about what people think of me. It's disastrous. And I really try and do something about it. And my friends say, "Oh, please, come on, Stephen. Why are you so upset about this? Who is it? They've just said this about you. Why should you care?" And I think, no, I shouldn't care. But I want everybody to love me. Everybody in the world. It's preposterous. It's so silly.
That is setting yourself up to fail.
It is, totally.
Yeah. But with that in mind, why do more and more memoirs? Because you are asking for it, are you not?
Yeah. And maybe it is a psychological desire to be spanked in public. All I can say is that I do desire, when I have a metaphorical these days, pen in my hand, a keyboard under my fingers, I feel a connection to all writers, whether it's Grub Street or whether it is the highest garrets of the finest writers in the world. The greatest novelists, greatest essayists, whether it's Montaigne in his Tower or whether it's Balzac in his Scribbling Away or whoever it might be. I feel connected to them, not necessarily in talent, but in that there is a sacred duty when you're a writer, which is to try and write the truth as you see it, just as a painter looks out of the window, looks up from his easel, looks across at the subject he's painting, or she's painting, and is struggling all the time to find the way to represent the truth of what they see. And it's similar with writing. The only difficulty, especially with a book, because you get one out in a year or whatever it is, and then you wait a little bit, is, and I can say this of YourFry, and it's 2 books, is that of the first one, the Fry Chronicles, I think I was in a really reasonably happy state when I wrote it. In YourFry, I was in what can only be described as a mixed state, and I know that if I were to write about that period of my life now, and it's not much later, I would have written a completely different book. I could even do that, which would be asking a bit much of the public to lash out on a similar book, or at least on a book covering a similar time frame. I think it would be less. I think it would pay less attention to the cocaine, or at least the attention it paid to it would be more self-forgiving, less self-lacerating. It would just lay it on with less of a trowel. If you
lighter touch.
A lighter touch, exactly. Well, that's a good way of putting it. Which doesn't mean I regret the way it was written, because it's a bit like what they say of period movies. Is that any period movie tells you an enormous amount about the period in which it was made, not about the period in which it is set. So if you watch Baz Luhrmann's Great Gatsby, for example, it tells you everything about this period of the noughties. Everything. You just look at it. Every frame of it is from that period, more or less our age now. If you look at the Robert Redford one with Mia Farrow, it says it's just so early 80s, it's ridiculous. All of them use the right makeup, the flappers, the music, everything to try and create their age, but they just tell you about the age in which they're made. And the book, which was written in the age in which it was set, tells you everything about its age and about our age, because it's such an extraordinary work of art. But it's true of my book as well, is that I read the book, all I can think of is not the period that it's describing, but the period in which I wrote.
And part of that period, of course, is this thing in which we're all living through at the moment, this digital revolution. And you made that part of your book, i.e. you asked people, in a way I suppose which is analogous to sort of fan fiction, you asked your readers to respond and create their own stories.
Yes.
Off the back of that. How did that process feel?
Well, it was fascinating, and when Penguin asked if I was up for this, I first had to just find out exactly what kind of thing they had in mind, because it's quite difficult. It's the whole idea of YourFry is a bit like trying to clutch a salmon. The harder you grasp, the further it flies away, because it's not, it's not just, let's make it multimedia. It's sort of more subtle than that. It is asking for an artistic approach towards the material. It's to in digital language, the content is there, and it's there in 2 forms: text, which can be manipulated endlessly, as we know these days, in all kinds of ways, and a sound file, because I did the audiobook for both of these. And I was very excited because I think it's wonderful to send out to creative people around the world. And Tom mentioned, Beirut and New Delhi, as well as Ukraine and Paris and Berlin, and obviously here in Britain, where there's such extraordinary talent in Scotland and England, Wales, and indeed Northern Ireland, and Ireland, for that matter. What I wanted to see...
You should work for the BBC, Stephen. You're very good.
Being so correct about it all. But what it is, when you sit down and write a book, you engage all of your emotions and all of your senses. You try and evoke all the senses of smell and taste, and you try and evoke music and images and so on, all using text. And that's the beauty of a book, is that by reading the text comes alive in your head, and you see pictures, and you smell smells, and you feel feelings, and you hear noises, and you are transported into the world that the writer is attempting to evoke. And so that's very good, and it's not that one wants to move away from that or say that that's old-fashioned and that we have to have a new form of storytelling. Narratives will always have new media behind them, of course. But what was great was finding these two staples, audio and text, and using the background of the various potentials, like the web, of course, and other such things, and touch technologies and all kinds of other things, to bring it all alive. And above all, and you'll see this when we mention those who've most excited us, the panel, including you, Will, so you'll know them, leavened by a truly great human quality, which is wit. And some of them are genuinely very funny, and that means they've been taken seriously, because people without a sense of humour just don't take the world seriously enough. That's, as Oscar pointed out.
He did. We should have a look at some. Before we do that, did anybody in the audience contribute to the YourFry project?
Yep, got that 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
Well, very good. Was it fun? Yeah, I mean, what's quite interesting about the concept is that the book is a starting point, not an end point.
Yes,
I suppose that's
completely.
Yeah,
very well put.
Okay, can we have a look at some of the submissions, please? It begs the obvious question, Stephen, is in general terms, what was your reaction to what you saw?
I was astonished by how varied and how intelligent and, as I said, witty, and totally unpredictable all the entries were that I looked at.
It's just that you said beforehand that in a way, when you're writing a memoir, actually other people are better judges and can contribute more. Now here's an example of people being able to do just that. What did people add, say, think, do, which gave you another view of yourself?
Well, it's interesting. They concentrated on 4 elements that Tom mentioned, actually: mental health, sexuality, education, and there's got to be another one, isn't there? Addiction, thank you. Damn, I wanted to forget that one. I was cured. And then you said addiction. Oh, damn. And addiction, yeah. And they used parts of the text, parts of my voice that I hadn't realized were so relevant to those areas. And they created a sort of emotional rhythm across the different pieces that surprised me enormously and delighted me.
What do you think of technology as a creative enabler, both from a good perspective and maybe from a negative perspective?
Well, I think I've enormous faith in human beings' desire and appetite for knowledge and to communicate knowledge and experience artistically, to create art, if you like. And new technology will come along. The obvious example that everybody naturally chooses is in 1450 when Gutenberg printed his first Bible. By 1500, only 50 years later, there was something like 50 million printed books in Europe, which, given the population and the mechanical printing time, is astounding. It is well equivalent of the explosion in the web. after '94 and Tim Berners-Lee's great invention was rolled out across the world. I think there will always be those who are very doubtful and who think that the human brain can't cope. But I would say this about the human brain. It is more miraculous than even the person who most thinks it miraculous can claim. I was thinking only the other day when I'd been in the country and I was standing in a field in Norfolk, and there were huge skies and it was calm, and I was looking at a copse of a little wood, and my eye could instantly pick up if a little fret of wind turned a leaf, and I saw it the silver reverse of the leaf, or a bird rocketed out of the wood. Of course, my whole brain was totally programmed to respond to these things in the countryside, a thing that might be possible food or a thing that might possibly want to eat me. That's what we're programmed, and that's natural. Okay, that's the human brain, that we understand that. But 3 hours later, I was standing in Oxford Street, and there were thousands and thousands of people coming at me in colours that just were completely unpredictable. 100 years ago, they would never seen such colours that people could wear. And I was on a phone talking to someone who was miles and miles away, and my brain was perfectly capable of processing everything. I didn't even know I was processing this. It was only when I stopped and compared what I'd experienced in the Norfolk countryside. That's how astonishing our brain is. So when the monks said in 1460 that the human memory is going to be destroyed by printing, we no longer will people have to know anything. They can look it up in a book, and that will destroy the human brain. Well, we laugh because what a ridiculous thing to say. We know that, in fact, the human memory was immeasurably enhanced by the arrival of printing. And so it is with the digital world. People have said, well, now there's Wikipedia, people won't know anything because they'll just look it up. They know far more than they've ever known, ever. It's fantastic. We have more knowledge at our fingertips than Napoleon had in libraries, in anywhere he had. More than Alexander the Great, more than Louis the 14th, more than any great monarch you can think of, or any great leader.
But in a way, Stephen, it's not the miraculous nature of the human brain isn't its ability to consume information. It's what it does with it.
Absolutely.
It's the ability to imagine,
to process it,
and realise those imaginations, to be creative.
Absolutely right. I was merely just saying that as a sort of foretaste of really just to remember how remarkable our brains are, and remember how, they're not vulnerable to some sort of strange destruction by the nature of the digital world, or any more than they were by television. If you remember all those people, those of us who are old enough to remember how television was going to soften the brain, video games were going to soften the brain, and now the online world and spending your time with social networking and so on is going to soften the brain. It doesn't, it sharpens it. It may be very tedious if people do it over the table when you're trying to have a dinner party or something. It's very annoying. You want to slap people. Put it away! Or you would want to drop it into the washing up sink and see their faces. Talking of revenge, the speakers here are fantastic. I'm going to take them home, and that'll show my neighbour who's fucking boss. Anyway, sorry, weren't they good? But yes, there was a time, Douglas Adams, who is always the ghost at these feasts, which talk about the future and the nature of the digital world. I remember him years and years and years ago saying that he had, which he'd sort of inherited from his father, a book called The Boy's Wonder Book of Science. And The Boy's Wonder Book of Science was written in the late 30s, around the time they'd come up with the DC motor, this electric motor. And it was a miracle. It was a wonderful thing, and it meant you could plug a motor into the wall and it could power things rather than having to use an internal combustion engine to power the motor, or steam. It could just go off the mains, and it showed a house of the late 1950s, early 60s, which they imagined, which was sort of cut away, and it had a huge electric motor in the attic and wheels and belts going off it, and it was powering everything: washing machines, phonographs, gramophones. Everything was being powered by this electric motor. And basically what the article was saying is we're all going to have to be electric motor literate. Yeah. What it didn't see was that there would be electric motors in washing machines, in gramophones, in cassette recorders, in whatever. Everything then had tiny, tiny little electric motors. We never think about them. We don't have to be electric motor literate. And Douglas's point was it's the same with this idea of computer illiteracy. You don't have to be computer literate. Because the computers just get smaller and smaller and smaller, and we think of the Internet of Things, or the Internet of Everything, as it's sometimes called. We just are allowed to get on with it. And perhaps a better image, in terms of creativity, is driving. It used to be, in the days of early motoring, you used to have to know how a car worked. You really did. Every 10 miles or so, you'd have to get under it and tweak the magneto and adjust the carburation and all this kind of thing, and then off you go again, and then you crank it up. And that's how computers still are, to some extent. We're still in the early days of motoring with computers. But we're more and more capable now of driving without really knowing how computers work. We don't have to adjust the memory stack. We don't have to suddenly write a patch in machine code in order to mend something. We may rely on others to do that in system updates or whatever, but essentially all we have to do is drive. And once you drive with minimum kind of interference and minimum bother, once you drive in terms of sound and vision, which we mostly can now, and in terms of editing, and which we visually process, we audially process, and we text process. There's very little to limit our imaginations. But the most important thing, I think, is that you have to be a consumer in order to be a provider. If you want to know how to write a play, it's essential you go to the theatre. It's absolutely pointless not going to the theatre. If you want to be a novelist, you can't be unaware of other novelists. It makes no sense. It's almost impossible that you're going to be a great novelist unless you have read other great novelists. Not because you copy them, but because you get some sense of the terrain that you want to be in. So it's really important to enjoy the works of others, I think.
Last question before we do the finalists. Again, a sort of a creativity stroke tech question. What's your view on copyright?
Well, I did an Apple event, an iTunes event at the Roundhouse some years ago, in which I said, sort of reasonably firmly, and got some stick for it, especially amongst my own fellow performers. I said, look, with all this stuff around, we have to realise that, yes, systematic abuse of copyright is a very bad thing for gain, but, and this was happening at the time, but to jump on students and young people who are doing compilation tapes, not providing peer-to-peer networks, which really do take the piss out of copyright, but just individuals. I said, well, you could have done that to me. When I was 16, I would borrow people's records and I would do a cassette compilation. I bet you did. Yeah, who didn't? We stole music. We were pirates. We should have been imprisoned. Well, do you know what? The moment I was old enough and had enough money to buy things, I bought them. But if I'd been threatened with imprisonment, and if I'd had friends who'd been imprisoned for doing compilation tapes, I would have thought, fuck you, music industry. You're arseholes. You really are arseholes. You're picking on young individual people who love music. And that's wrong. You shouldn't. Let them make compilations and mixes from their friends' stuff. Let them rip CDs and swap it occasionally amongst their friends. As long as they're not making money off it, as long as they're not really making money off it, you know that when they're older, they will be buyers. They will be your best customers, and they will like you, and they will believe in music, and they'll believe in downloading music properly. But so just don't attack the citizens of tomorrow who will be decent. That's my idea.
Well, on that passionate note, Stephen, let's have a look at the 4 shortlisted winners. Are they winners of the people who took your copyright and had fun with it?
Yes, indeed, and we're very welcome to it. So let's have a look. Yeah, are we doing them one by one? So the number one is not in order of number one or number one. Just the first one we're showing is from Michael Shorter, and it's called A Touch of Fry. Note the word touch.
What shape?
That could get quite filthy quite quickly.
It's wonderful. I don't know about you. I'm just stunned by the sort of screen printing aspect of it. Soldering would be one thing, and I go, gosh, soldering, that's really geeky and that's so impressive. But to use this sort of black gunk as a circuit. It was beautiful, apart from anything else, and so flat. And anyway, charming and wonderful. So let's have a look at the second one, which is called Fry, and it's they can't sadly be here. It's by Evgenia Shryochenkova and Mikhail Meleshkin. I hope I pronounced those right. And here they are, from the Ukraine. That's a real beauty to play with, that one. Absolutely wonderful. You can carry on reading there. Whoop, it's gone. Really stunning. Everything just seamlessly and beautifully connects. So whatever piece of text you've chosen, you just chase this beautiful little flowing thing that goes all the way through the web. And so one idea is it's like Ignes Fatuus, St Elmo's fire, which is little pockets of methane in a marsh, and if one of them gets lit, and then another one gets lit, and the illusion is of a trace going all the way along. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Anyway, so the next one is called Speaking Fry, and I think you'll find it amusing. It's by Paul Hudson. I'm very, very glad they didn't choose the slightly ruder ones. But there you see there's a sort of like what you might call a database of phrases that were regarded as being signature phrases or something similar. And they were chosen so quickly you may not have seen the whole list of them, because there's a sort of guess ahead thing. So as you type, a shorter number is available for you to choose from, because you've chosen the word could or something. So all the ones with the word could or couldn't in it are chosen. Anyway, it's very, very quickly learned, and we're making, obviously, as you can see from its user interface, we make a very natural iOS app. Anyway, and so the fourth we're going to have a look at is the Book of Bipolarity by Sarah Waygold. Wonderful.
Did she get that right?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, it's extraordinary, as you said in that piece, to try and get in my head. It's an odd thought that people try and get in your head, but then that's what writers are asking people to do, and this project more than any other, of course, and I think you did it superbly. You must work next on the thing. My friend William Goldman, the screenwriter, has always said it's a disgrace that there's no irony font. And it's desperately needed in Twitter. If you can do anything, but unfortunately it needs going to ASCII, I think, doesn't it, who control the assignation of characters in standard text is all done by ASCII, and so we need them desperately, because otherwise there's going to be a murder on the basis of a misplaced piece of irony.
Of all the things you do, acting, presenting, writing, comedy, which one, if you could only do one?
Well, I think writing is the most satisfying. I mean, you come off stage after something that the audience has liked, and it's a nice feeling. It's definitely quite high, but there's always something that, I don't know, there's an embarrassment because there are other people there. But writing, the very bad thing about it is that it's lonely, but the very good thing is that when you've had a good day at the desk, you're stretching and hoping that your back isn't ruined, and you feel so wonderful. It's fantastic. It's the best feeling in the world.
I saw you in 12th Night, Stephen, and you were magnificent. I really
Thank you.
hope you don't drop that. Right, who would like to ask Stephen Fry a question? He's all yours for the next 10 minutes or so. We've got microphones. There's no need to be shy. He's not remotely scary.
No, they're not shy. They're just girding up their loins. Somebody wave their hand, and then a gramophone will come to them.
There's a guy there, yeah. And yeah.
Hi, Stephen.
Hello.
Just a quick question. Are you conscious with your writing now around the various different mediums that are available? Or would you adapt afterwards, for example, with audio or with what we've seen this evening?
That's a good question. I do know whenever I write a book that I'm going to have to do the audiobook for it. But that I like that fact, and I have to say, ever since I started writing, I've always felt the sound of words and the rhythm of them to be very important. And so yes, I can remember my first novel, The Liar. I can remember very clearly standing up with printout and saying whole pages, not even knowing I would do an audiobook really then. So there is a strong feeling of the sound, as for other things, no, I hadn't really imagined. It was really with the Fry Chronicles that it all kicked off in terms of multimedia in quite that way. And I remember Penguin were very pleased because it was the first book that was #1 as a hardback, as an app, as an audio book. As there were 2 other categories, I can't even remember what they were, but there were 5 categories in which it was in the market and doing well, which was very pleasing. But I think, people will always want something in their lap to read, and I think people now really more than ever as well like to walk with a book or drive with a book, or iron or sit in a bath, with an audio book as well. I think those two go together very well.
Do you prefer the printed page to read from, or do you prefer an iPad or a Kindle or whatever it might be?
I'm happy with both. At home, it's nearly always the printed word, but when travelling, simply, e-book is well named. Electrons, as we remember from school, have minus charge and whatever spin, but they have no mass, or at least their mass is tiny. It is, I believe, the mass of electrons that is part of the big quest for the Higgs boson. So or the field of it. We mustn't claim there's no mass, but essentially, according to any machine any of us have got, they've got no mass. What I'm really saying is, shove an iPad with no books on it on the scale, and it weighs X. Shove an iPad with 1,000 books on a scale, and it weighs X. And any of us who've tried to carry more than 3 books in our luggage around the world will know how much real atomic books weigh. And it was Nicholas Negroponte's book, Being Digital, that really unwrapped that whole thing about living in an atomic molecular world where things are made of stuff. They're made of iron and paper and wood and whatever else it is, or an electronic world where they are made of nothing palpable that need worry us.
Do you think the experience is the same, though?
No, I don't exactly. But on the other hand, I think, again, it's part of the human brain's brilliance, is that we can sit on an aeroplane with an iPad or a Kindle or whatever of choice, and very quickly, if the book's any good, we're sunk into the book and it stops mattering. It really does. I think it would only matter enormously in a book that isn't very good. I mean, there are those who would say you couldn't read... You have to read Ulysses in the Bodley Head edition, otherwise it's just not the same. Well, yeah, but frankly, if you've got no other option but the Penguin edition or some other edition, it's still the same great novel. It's not going to fail to deliver.
Who's read Ulysses? The Bodley Head edition apparently is the one.
It is. Or Jane Austen in the Oxford edition, where they have the extra little. They have the first word of the next page on at the foot. Have you seen? That's a lovely edition on Oxford India paper. It's beautiful.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Another question, please.
Hi. I wanted to know, were you ever apprehensive of kind of letting other people manipulate your own words in this kind of form, or was it more an exciting kind of?
Well.
prospect?
You're sitting next to my editor. She does nothing but manipulate my words. No, she's extremely good. No, I was very excited about the idea of people manipulating my words because I knew that the books would still exist in whatever forms, the e-book and the hardback and the paperback yet to come, of course. But it was very exciting to have the possibility of people, putting in different order and using the rhythm of one phrase and repeating it like a drum, which kind of changes the meaning of certain bits around it. I think all that's terribly exciting. It's a bit like digging up a garden or something, except the original garden will always exist. So I was thrilled by it.
I want to ask a YourFry a question. Can we get a microphone to this nice lady in the middle here?
Oh, yeah. Just that.
Yeah. A YourFry, a nervous YourFry.
Does she mind?
No, it should be fine.
Well, I didn't have any questions.
No, but I've got a question for you.
Okay.
Why did you want to respond to the YourFry idea?
Oh, well, I like Stephen so much. And
That's a good start.
Oh, thank you.
That's why. Yeah, well, it was very much fun to make, and because it was a good practice to use Photoshop, and then I like you, so that's why.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
That's very nice.
Can I tell you that the lady flew from Finland yesterday and is flying back because of you?
Oh my goodness! Are you Johanna Animator?
Yes.
Hey, fantastic!
Yay.
And nice. Thank you very much. It's lovely to see you again.
Lovely to see you again.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, we got a swomy.
Right. Sorry. Another question.
On a totally different...
The Finnish have got the microphone. That's that.
I'm not going to give it up now. Anyway, congratulations on your decent wedding.
Thank
I was
you.
just thinking whether you will be starting a family.
Well, now that's peeping into Volume 2. Volume 1, the marriage is still, well, I hope it'll never close, but Volume 2, the little family, the patter of tiny feet. You just come back to me on that one.
That was a good question. Yeah. This gentleman over here.
Hello. I would never forgive myself if I wouldn't ask anything. So I recently read about your journey through the America on your cab.
Yeah.
So are you going to do anything else? Something similar in some other big country like, I don't know, Russia or...
I would love to do it in Russia. I am doing it. I'm in the middle of doing another series of, as you say, in America was going around in a cab. This is going around Central America. All the countries of Central America. There are 8. You will now all recite to me the 8 countries of Central America. No, don't worry. I can tell you what they are. I wouldn't have been able to recite them all exactly either. I would have missed one out or got one wrong. But anyway, Mexico, although that is technically North America, and we filmed in Mexico before Christmas, and I'm driving a school bus, one of those big yellow American school buses. It's not as random as it sounds because it's American and we're in Mexico and other countries. They are very, very common as a sight throughout Central America. They're known as chicken buses because you often see on them chickens running around and goats tethered to the seat and little old ladies in black. And they are a common way of getting around, so they seemed a good idea. So we're driving that, and as of late next month, we start in Belize, and the countries are in order, sort of going that way down to the border with Colombia, which is obviously South America. We are Mexico, and then Belize, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama, and we finish in Panama. And we weren't allowed, I wasn't allowed to use any social media of any kind by the underwriters, the insurance people, nor were we allowed to drive at night. Kidnapping, well, is the big issue there. Honduras is the murder capital of the world, so that's going to be exciting. Guatemala City is, I think, the 3rd most dangerous city on earth. So, nothing. It's not the most dangerous or even the 2nd most. Costa Rica, on the other hand, is the happiest country on earth, according to the United Nations. It has no army. It's a blissful place. And yet it borders places that are very, very dangerous. It's most odd. But they're all, have incredible culture, food, history. I mean, obviously Belize and Mexico have the Mayan civilizations, the Aztec civilizations, and many, many others who left incredible records. And they have phenomenal food, drink, music, culture. It's very exciting. So that's what I'm doing.
Do you speak Spanish?
I can get by. Sí.
Yeah.
How about that? Not
Clearly
bad.
you do. Right. Not this gentleman here. I think a microphone's coming along to you. You'll be lucky if you get past the Finns, to be honest. But
Thank you. Stephen, you've achieved and created a lot yourself. I was wondering, do you feel that people like yourself and people like you have a role to inspire others in new areas or not new areas?
It's an interesting question. On the one hand, one wouldn't want to be so cocky as to assume that one has anything to teach people. On the other, yes, it saddens me to think that not everyone is kind of encouraged to believe in their own creativity or that their contribution, which is endless, that humans can make. I've often thought that computers can provide a fantastic opportunity to educate, not in the way we have it, but through developments in AI, in artificial intelligence. And the model I've set up in my head is of a smart computer, not an expert system, to use AI language, but imagine, for example, as a student who's going to be tested, and this test is the equivalent of what we might call an A-level or a degree exam or anything in between or anything earlier. These are things that really mark people out for life sometimes. They're incredibly important and can destroy people's futures if they get it wrong. And a lot of us believe, I think, that exams seem to be designed to show what people don't know, to humiliate them, to leave, and that's not what an exam should be. And I think, so imagine a computer that you can go up to, and the computer comes up with an almost random word. Let's say the word is coffee. Now, you can, once you're confident about the way these things work, let's suppose you're interested in 17th century history. You can talk about coffee shops, the first coffee shops. Charles II closed them down, right around here, up in Covent Garden, places like that, because they were, as he saw it, places for sedition and politics. So you could talk about coffee shops and coffee in that sense. Or if you're a scientist, you could talk about the emulsification and the making of the drink and how it's done. If you're interested in geopolitics, you can talk about monocultures and crops and so on, and the fair trade or lack of it, and you can talk about the imperial history of coffee. If you're a publisher, you can talk about coffee table books and what they stand for and what they mean. You can talk about the rise of the Starbucks. All of you can think off the top of your heads. And basically, that means you go to the computer and you show off everything you know about coffee. And you avoid, the scientific stuff if you're not very scientific about it. And you go right into the social side of it if you want to talk about baristas and the phenomenon of frothy coffee in the modern age as opposed to frothy coffee in the 1950s with the bars in Soho and so on. So that would allow people to show so much of what they knew and what they were enthusiastic about. And if they didn't like coffee, they could just press a button and it would go and another word would come up. It could be polo, and they could talk about the mint, they could talk about the game, they could talk about the Volkswagen car. It's just that the computer would know enough to be able to say, wow, it has cleaned out my memories. This person has just ticked every box as far as this area is concerned, and would be able to encourage. The trouble is you can't get an individual teacher to be able to do all that. So I think that would be a marvellous thing. And I'm sure it won't be that far away.
If anybody's in any doubt, Stephen's next book is going to be about coffee. We've got time maybe for we'll take these two questions, then I'm afraid we ought to wrap. So these two gentlemen at the front.
Hi, yes. Expanding on what you've just said regarding a computer that's based on the data rather than based on documents, which is also what Tim Berners-Lee is calling the semantic web.
Yeah.
My partner Evgenia, when she was developing the MapFry project in response to your invitation, we talked a lot about it, and one of the things that is driving her is the idea of being able to go to this game and being able to find out everything there is that you could possibly know about coffee, in which case it would fit into this idea of, basically of the semantic web. And we discussed at length the idea of artificial intelligence within computers, which is presumably what Tim Berners-Lee would like to see happening with Web 3.0. But she talked, my partner is discussing the idea that artificial intelligence, it could present us with a big danger. Is that something that you have also considered?
Well, and it is something that has been spoken about a lot, isn't it? I believe Stephen Hawking has spoken about it, and he has every right. That's not mocking him. Let's just go. I think I do know Stephen Hawking, and he likes it when I do that. That's what. Just thought I should tell you that, in case you thought I was making fun of him. Of course there are dangers. I sort of started following AI in the days of Marvin Minsky, who's considered the father of artificial intelligence, and he said some very wise things about it, and things have been set down. People are already talking about having a constitution for robots, and the prime directives of robotics have been established for 40 or 50 years, I think, haven't they? In terms of how deeply you can allow, how you have to program a robot not to do certain things. They must never ever harm a human, for example. That's deep in their programming. But how can we be sure that can't be somehow circumvented? It's very hard to say. But we're such a long way away from all that, which doesn't mean we shouldn't be thinking about it, quite the reverse. The thing that most inspired me about the early days of artificial intelligence was a simple and obvious point, and maybe one that would inspire you if you're programmers or if you're interested in developing things in any way, as engineers even, of course, is he said, there's a mistake we make, which is we call engineering solutions elegant, and we call them economical. And we think that's a marvelous, compliment. So we look at a tripod. Look at that. It's perfect. No, it isn't. You break one leg, it falls over. Go to nature, which has had millions of years to refine its engineering. You can break a dog's leg. It's a cruel and horrible thing to do, but it can become broken. It still walks. Break two, as long as they're not. It can still hop, amazingly. You can pull feathers out of a bird until you think you're going mad, and it will still fly. You can break its wing, and it can still fly. The point is, there's a lot of inbuilt redundancy. There's a lot you can do because, and this is the point he made for AI, what they all depend on are agencies, bundles of function. So a wing is a bundle of feathers. It's a bundle of things. A leg is a bundle of ligaments and so on. And so they're very hard to destroy entirely. Whereas, as you know, you go into a computer program and you turn 1 0 into a 1 or 1 1 into a 0, and the whole thing just falls over. And it's the same with a lot of things that human beings design. They just fall over if you just kick them. Whereas if you try and imagine, and computing power is allowing us now to do this, to grow things, to let them evolve, to take the lesson from nature. It's always the way that's going to work, because the system that nature is, if you want to call it that, is one that has just tried and tried over hundreds and hundreds of millions of years. And we don't have hundreds and hundreds of millions of years, but we do have petaflops of processing power with which to be able to try and mimic in small ways, which is exciting, I think.
Okay, the last question just here.
Hello, Stephen.
Hello.
Just a quick question. Going back to the kind of thing about, I know recently you've spoken about freedom of speech and et cetera, et cetera. And with the YourFry project being about limitless imagination almost, would you say there's something you're particularly interested in within the next few years or within the near future that you would really like to see within an area of freedom of expression and freedom of speech?
Well, it's certainly an interesting point. I would be thrilled if people who come from cultures and societies in which freedom of speech is difficult were to try and involve themselves in something like this, which wouldn't be seen as a direct threat that could get them into trouble. It wouldn't get them whipped in the town square. It wouldn't get them imprisoned for expressing themselves, but would allow them to have full creative reign on things from their country. That's obviously important. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about this whole freedom of speech thing, because people, I think, get a bit not confused, but there are differing views. With the Charlie Hebdo, I set my stand out and said, that people should be free to offend, and I believe that. And people tweeted me and said, well, suppose we offended, homosexuals. I said, well, fine, you can write an offensive piece about homosexuals, as far as I'm concerned, and I would have permission to write an offensive piece about you as a result, and call you a fucking idiot. That's how it goes. That's how it works. That's fine. But I also wrote a piece for Holocaust Memorial Day, which is tomorrow, I think, in which I talked about having met this extraordinary woman, Anita Lasker-Wallfisch, who was a survivor from Auschwitz, who was a cellist. She played under the baton of Alma Rosa, who was Mahler's niece, and incredible woman, very tough, very extraordinary. And we talked a lot, and the thing I sort of came away with, which is something I've thought about before, is for the Holocaust to have happened, and it's the same in Rwanda, there's the radio station there, the De Colline radio station, which for weeks broadcast, that Tutus were cockroaches. Kill the cockroaches, they're cockroaches. No human except a psychopath can kill another human without some sense of remorse. And there aren't enough psychopaths in any given population to destroy another through genocide. So you have to do something to recruit the ordinary members of that population. And what you do is you dehumanize those that you wish to kill. And Streicher and Goebbels, for a very long period in time, described and showed, as it were, that the Jews were lice and rats and vermin. They were not human. They were subhuman. And if you grow up, if you're 5, 6, 7 years, 8 years, maybe 9, 10 years even, of that, because it was 43 that it started to be put in train, and 44 and 45 that the Holocaust truly exploded in terms of the death camps. So there were people who had probably 12 years of indoctrination that Jews were not human. And so they could do things to them that really still absolutely chill the blood. And so in order to guard against another Holocaust, we have to watch language. We have to watch those who use language and those who speak in such a way as to dehumanize other people. And that may sound, if I express it wrong, is if I'm recommending some sort of politically correct speech in which you're not allowed to do this and not allowed to be that. Well, what I'm recommending is more or less what we have, which is that you just don't allow people to incite hatred or to kill. You don't allow someone to say, kill the cockroaches. But that's not the same as banning people who draw cartoons or who mock. So it's a very delicate business. And delicate nuances of this kind are not easily followed, especially when we have the world of digital media around, where people are going to, possibly play with what they think may be legal, which may turn out at least to be very destructive and harmful to any given group of people, including Islamic people, of course. I mean, it's not just about protecting Jews, because I happen to be Jewish. Obviously, I have that memory from the family, but if it should teach one anything, it's that it applies to us all. Mm.
Okay, well, I feel that we're really just warming up, Stephen.
Yeah, so,
but I'm afraid that is the end of the session. We went on a little bit longer because I think we started a little bit late. But I hope you will agree with me. That was a fabulously interesting, insightful and entertaining hour with Mr. Fry. And please, could you show him your appreciation by giving a round of applause.
Thank you very much. In hock to Apple, it could easily be an Android device, but unfortunately I'm not a total idiot. So no, shush. So yeah, it was. I can't actually. Oh yes, no, it was Cole Porter. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thank you. That's dealt with. So to your autobiography or your memoir, whatever you wish to call it, the third in the series. John Humphreys is a very great man at the BBC. He's brilliant at interviewing people. And when I started at the BBC, I asked him, what's the trick of a good interview? And he says, keep the question short. This
well
is,
done.
by the way, yeah. And this is an anecdote more than a question. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, just start with one word, why, and then build it from there if necessary.
Yes. Well, Kipling had the the 5 W's and the H, wasn't it?
Why, what, when, how.
Why, what, when, how, where. Yeah. The journalist questions. Yeah.
So the question on the third memoir is why.
It's a really good question.
And short.
Very short. Contractual obligation is one reason, of course. But also pride. I got so far with one book and then a second. They'd taken me up to a kind of real hinge in my life. And I thought, well, I've got to press on with this, even though it's an unfortunate period of my life in many ways. It's, well, very successful in worldly terms. I was doing lots of films and television and writing and so on, but also in social and personal terms, it was pretty much a disaster. I was alone and lonely, and I had taken to regular supply of cocaine, which
You
of
talk
course
about that quite
are inspiring, very impressive, and I can never be that brave. So I think the criterion is that it is what is, I hope, entertaining. If it becomes dull or it becomes disgusting and turns into something that repels people rather than entrances them, then I'm not really interested in conveying it.
No, you spend a lot of time in the public eye, both as a writer, presenter, comedian, actor, all of the above. It strikes me writing a memoir makes one particularly vulnerable. That people aren't just criticising the work of art; they're criticising the person.
Yeah. The person they don't necessarily know, but they think they know.
You've
and
given
that's
them
my
liberty to
fault.
make a decision, yeah.
I've projected a personality that people imagine that they know, and they can judge me rightly according to that. And we all do it. Even if you here don't do it to me, you probably do it to Anne Widdecombe or or David Cameron or something like that. People you may not have met, but you have a strong view of. And you might go, "Bleh," every time they appear on television. Or you might go, "Wow, God, I love them." And in both cases, it's a prejudgment. It is prejudice in its literal sense. And we all are guilty of prejudice. And it's one of the natures of celebrities that we prejudge celebrities according to our own taste. And it's either revulsion or disgust or something similar, or dislike, or of course it can be indifference, or it can be absolute love, hero worship, and in all cases it's not necessarily right, but it speaks to something we need. I need heroes, so there are people I worship, and they can be as
explicitly.
I do. I've never seen the point of writing a memoir which isn't honest, at least as honest as one can make it without traducing other people whose, it's not my business too much to mention other people or to destroy their reputations, or indeed to just mention them in any way if they don't want to be. So it's really, I'm the only one I can attack. I'm the only one I can assault and describe and dissect. Even if I can't do it necessarily accurately, I can always say, I think anybody who's ever tried to write an autobiography, you can always say what happened, but you can very rarely say why. It's, the spectator sees more of the game. I think my friends and family probably know better than I do why I behaved in certain ways, and certainly the effect of it. And all I can do is remember what I did, but it's very hard to remember why.
I mean, the other really difficult thing I would imagine is how to self-edit. What to put in, what to not to put in. Now you said obviously you don't want to put stuff in there which is going to put other people in an awkward position, but you also have to make a decision what you yourself decide to put in and what you decide to not put in. Other than, I suppose, you want to entertain people. What is the criteria for you?
I suppose in the end the criterion I've always had, and it's one that I'm not necessarily proud of, because it stops me ever being an artist or a person of great authenticity, is what's entertaining. Yeah. I am primarily an entertainer, and I admire artists more than almost any other type of human being. And the ones I know, and I think I mentioned this in the book, the ones I know have a strength of character and of a directness, which is, to me, very
good. So I'll chat to Stephen a bit. We're going to have another video. I'll chat to Stephen a bit more. We'll then do all the winners, which will be very exciting. And then we're going to have bring the audience in so you can chat to Stephen as well. That's basically the format. The first question I've got, Stephen, is a tough one. Are you going to take your coat off?
Well, I thought I looked rather cool in my coat.
Well, coolish, but we're slightly worried you might just bugger off to Belgium or something.
I might take it off then. Go on.
There you go.
I'll leave it in a puddle underneath me. There it is.
Nice and warm in the apples. Well,
yeah, it's fine.
The second thing I'd like to say, and I think on behalf of us all in the Apple Store, is congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, bless you. Thank you. There's my ring. It's very exciting. I'm probably the only person who's ever got married, so I can tell you it's really exciting. It's great. It's thrilling. I'm very happy.
I mean, it was quite an interesting moment. Here we are going to talk about technology, and the marriage, you were outed, so to speak, because of technology.
Well, not strictly true. Well, the marriage I outed myself using technology, but in fact the engagement had been of long standing, and I went to a registry office, and they explained that the announcement had to go up, and so somewhere on a small piece of paper in a municipal building in Norwich was my name and the name of my now husband, and
still feels good.
Yeah, it does. It's great. And that was picked up. Somebody saw that, and they told the press about that. So that was very old school.
Right.
But when it came marvellously, the registrar, who was extremely on our side with our desire not to have photographers and journalists at the actual ceremony, she brilliantly put a false date in the computer, so that anybody who hacked it or sneakily looked at it, who shouldn't, would think we were going to be married on the 7th of March. And she didn't tell anybody else what the real date was, so we managed to get married without a single journalist present. But then, yes, I tweeted a picture of ourselves saying, you know, that we'd gone in as separate people and come out as one. And that sort of put it under our control. It meant that the press would no longer be following us, because you can't really pretend that the press aren't interested in something, although it seems very vain to try and control the press. If you don't, they will control you. So it's pretty necessary. And that actually, Twitter, for the last 7 or 8 years that I've been on it, it is wonderful to know that I don't have to do certain interviews and profiles because I have more followers than the circulation of that newspaper, which is really, I know it's terrible, but it's very, very good to know.
Steering towards a spot of megalomania.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but it's just handy.
Did you have a first dance?
Yes, anyone who's seen me dance wouldn't have called it a dance exactly, but it was a shuffle.
What was the tune?
I had wanted to choose a tune written by Al Jolson. It's the only great tune he wrote, as far as I know. He had some great hits, of course, like California, Here I Come, and you know, Sunny, and you know, Sunny Boy, and so on. But he did write one called "Oh How We Danced on the Night That We Wed," but I couldn't get it on my performing thing, which might or may not have been an Apple thing, which I wouldn't want to suggest that I'm in any way